People are discussing AI, people are discussing stocks, people are discussing commodities. People don't discuss, I don't know, great blockchain technology in any shape or form.
Hello and welcome back to Fortune's Crypto Playbook. I'm finance and crypto editor Jeff John Roberts.
And I'm senior reporter Leo Schwartz.
We've got another lively show today. We're going to kick it off with the return of crypto's scuzziest figure, which is, of course, Sam Bankman-Fried. Then we've got a couple of scoops from Leo and me on Dragonfly's new funding round and a new policy shop in DC. And then we're going to be speaking with the CEO and founder of Wintermute, one of the leading figures in crypto, who's got some very dark things to say about the industry. So that'll be rather interesting. We'll take it from there. Okay, Leo, Sam Bankman-Fried, he's back. What's going on?
I mean, I never think there's that much more to say to him or even to give oxygen to him. But the latest development is he's figured out someone who he can call from his prison phone and dictate tweets to. Famously, back in the trial, it surfaced that SBF had come up with different strategies for how he could maybe get off of the charges of tanking FTX and taking all of the investors' money with it. One of those was doing a heel turn to being conservative and appealing basically to the Tucker Carlsons of the world. He's very much doing that now. He's trying to appeal to Trump's pro-crypto crusade and say, I was mistreated, I should get a pardon. And his Twitter has been filled with that recently. I don't know if anyone's really taking it seriously, though.
Yeah. And I mean, I was actually reluctant to put this on the show or acknowledge it at all. It's just, there seems to be a lot of money behind this campaign, whatever it is. It's this elaborate sort of sock puppet AstroTurf campaign. I mean, remember, he's in federal prison. So who's running all of this campaign and where's the money coming from? There's this absolutely devastating body slam takedown of what's going on. I guess his argument this time is like, look, I took a small stake in Anthropic and I'm a genius and everyone be made right. It's all lies. Everything with him is always lies. But this is a really smart takedown. I look at my Twitter feed, you'll see it. And he just deconstructs it. But the part I like too is he zeroes in on Sam Bankman-Fried's parents, who like amazingly are still employed at Stanford Law School. You know, and this guy was like, this is cheapening my degree from Stanford. And I think that's exactly right. Because these sort of campaigns aren't cheap. It's clearly a very skilled, PR lobbyist and firm to be running a campaign of this scale. So who's paying for it? And is that coming from FTX customer money? I think so. Anyways, same old Sam Bankman-Fried. I don't think he's going to pardon even from this administration, but perhaps, Leo, you can give Trump's pardon czar a call. Have you seen he's got a pardon czar?
I think I did see that story. And I mean, here are the two charitable reads of the situation. One of which is that Trump has been giving pardons out to figures who probably should not be getting pardons, including ones accused of similar types of fraud. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that SBF, who's going to be locked in jail for decades, says, why not give it a try and appeal to Trump's ego? The other, I mean, SBF's argument has always been the money was there and that he was investing it in smart ways. Let's break this down. He did make a number of venture investments that have performed very well. And I think people are looking at it and saying, well, if he'd actually raised money from LPs in a traditional way, he could be one of the most successful VCs of all time. That's including stakes in Anthropic, as well as buying a minority stake in Robinhood. But as we know, having covered this trial very carefully, the issue is that he was using money that he was not allowed to use. He was using investor capital on FTX without their consent to make these investments. And obviously that's illegal. It doesn't matter how well these investments did. It wasn't his money to invest.
It's like just because if you run someone over with your car and they recover and like run a marathon, you don't get to take credit for the guy's marathon.
I never heard that one.
And finally, in the Trump pardon campaign too, I mean, whatever you think of Trump, he doesn't seem to like associating himself with losers. And I just think that like Sam Bankman-Fried is just too, he's just too slimy even for the White House. So I'd be very surprised if this works. If it does work, I guess I'm in trouble because his Sam's first order of business probably going to be coming after us, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, I think we can pivot now to talking about a successful investor in crypto. This is Dragonfly. Dragonfly is a crypto native VC, meaning that they only invest in blockchain, as opposed to a firm like Sequoia that dabbles in different industries. They've been around for a bunch of years. They've been around for a number of crypto downturns. They've always been very well regarded in crypto, but I think some of their bets are starting to make them break through more into a mainstream way. That includes early bets on Polymarket, as well as Rain, which is a stablecoin credit card company, essentially, as well as Athena, which is another stablecoin company. And even amid what one of their general partners, Rob Haddock, told me was a mass extinction event among blockchain VCs, they've managed to raise a fourth fund, $650 million, which is certainly impressive given the bear market that we're in. So it was fun doing a profile of them, sort of going through the history of the firm, which has included plenty of rocky turns, including a breakup between the two founders of the firm, as well as notably last year, the DOJ briefly said that they might consider criminal charges against one of their partners because of their role in Tornado Cash, which is the sort of infamous privacy protocol crypto mixer. Lots of fun details in there, but it was a fun profile to work on.
Yeah, I urge people to read the piece. I liked it too. And it seems their secret sauce is a bit of like the right Asia connections with the right amount of banking and quant stuff. They seem to sort of have it figured out. And it's nice to see, someone doing well in the space right now. Just before we move on, let's break down a little bit about that. I like that quote about the crypto VC extinction event. So what did he mean by that? Why are crypto VCs going extinct?
Yeah, so one of their partners, and I think what makes Dragonfly notable in a lot of ways is that they have these 4 partners leading the firm who each have these different expertise areas. So one of them, named Tom Schmidt, who's sort of the DeFi whiz at the firm, basically said that we're going through the biggest meta shift in crypto, or the biggest paradigm shift with how VCs think about how to invest in crypto. Where a few years ago, there was all this hype around Web3, or this idea that we're going to build all of these decentralized alternatives to the plumbing of the internet, whether it was Spotify or Twitter. All of these projects would come with tokens, their own native tokens. And basically VCs would make their money by investing in the as of yet unlaunched tokens for these projects. And when they launched, they would be able to trade them and make a lot of money from it. What we've seen instead is that Web3 vision never really played out. Instead, we're almost seeing this fintechification of crypto, where the most successful projects are the ones that are this intersection between crypto and Wall Street, stablecoins, tokenization, et cetera. And in this instance, a lot of VCs are making their money by taking traditional equity stakes. And I think what Rob, who said the mass extinction quote, meant was that this old playbook that crypto VCs had didn't really play out. Dragonfly was ahead of the curve in realizing right now crypto is really a fintech play. It's not necessarily a Web3 play.
Yeah, that's interesting. It does seem the Web3 era is kind of cooked, but crypto always surprises us. We'll see. I know Chris Dixon's pushing back on that. We'll see if it comes back. But I think for now, it's pretty fair commentary. In other news, I got to speak with Jake Cherinsky, who's, within a certain nerdy DC policy circles, kind of a legend. He's probably one of the top crypto lawyers, or the top crypto lawyer. And he's got a new nonprofit think tanky sort of thing, basically Hyperliquid, the big trading platform's giving some money to do a DeFi policy shop in DC. You're closer to DC stuff than me, Leo, but I get the impression from a distance that there's sort of there's some stuff up for grabs. It feels that some of the traditional groups are less influential after losing their key leaders. And so maybe Jake is going to be the new big dog on this stuff. What's your take?
I think DC's always been a bit too crowded with crypto policy shops, trade associations, just by virtue of the fact of how much money there is sloshing around crypto. And there has always seemed to be a bit of a split between more of the centralized players, the Coinbases of the world, versus the ones who are really arguing for DeFi as the preeminent principles that policymakers should be prioritizing. So you have had different firms trying to advance DeFi deals more. I think it makes sense now that a company like Hyperliquid is one of the most successful in crypto, as well as this reality that market structure bills are moving along with potential threats to DeFi, that we're seeing the DeFi crowd push back more. To be honest, I'm not really sure what the current power dynamics are between the different policy shops, but it'll be interesting to see what type of influence this one will have and what types of politicians they'll be able to win over, especially because I think it's hard for most politicians to even understand what crypto is, let alone, decentralized lending protocols.
Although I think with the recent news of BlackRock, and then I've heard Apollo too is looking to plug into DeFi backends. I just think that it's a new frontier technology that is going to need a lot of explaining, and Jake will probably do a good job of that. But, one thing at a time, we'll see. What else do we have on the books?
I mean, speaking of DC, I think one of the more interesting stories, the new CFTC chair, Mike Selig, who's long been a prominent crypto lawyer figure, has really struck back on this issue of prediction markets. So the biggest trend in prediction markets has been Obviously, the CFTC allowed these to happen under the Trump administration after a big legal victory under the Biden administration. But a bunch of states have been pushing back and saying gaming is our remit. There shouldn't be these federally regulated prediction markets where 90% of their volume is essentially sports betting. The CFTC didn't really have a dog in the fight until Mike Selig came out with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend and said, no, this belongs to the CFTC. We're going to fight against states saying that this is not a federally regulated type of asset. So we're seeing the CFTC really take a stance in this fight for the first time. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with that.
I mean, I don't really care so much as a free country. If you're going to bet, you're going to bet. But I find it, the lawyer in me finds it obnoxious that they're trying to claim that prediction market sports betting is not gambling. I mean, give me a break. You know, were you the one saying that someone's trying to parse the distinction between betting and gambling?
Yeah, so a story that we had this week also was another prediction market. This one's called Novig, and it's focused only on sports. So whereas Kalshi and Polymarket say we're doing event contracts for all sorts of different things, whether it's the weather tomorrow or who's going to win, you know, a state election, this company is saying we're only doing sports. And I mean, the founder was saying to me somewhat hilariously that, you know, betting and gambling have a different distinction. I don't know if this is a real argument, but basically what's notable is even the CFTC is saying we think that there's a real utility with these types of contracts, even if it's just essentially betting on the outcome of sports games. Although notably, if you read the Wall Street Journal editorial, Selig doesn't mention sports a single time, even though that's what the vast majority of the volume is these days.
It's going to be interesting too, because I think the legal proposition is like a jump ball at best. I think it's hard, I think the law does say that, sports is a matter for the states. So if they lose that, what's that do to the revenue and stuff? But obviously there's a lot of legal firepower pushing the other way. And anyways, before we cut to the Evgeny interview, we were speaking to him, of course, to get about his tweet where he was sort of as a vibes thing. And per our conversation in the last episode of what's the mood with the crypto market right now? Why is everyone so down? And the markets, lately just sort of seem to be scuffling along. They haven't gotten that much worse, but nor have they got much better. So what are you seeing out there in terms of like market narrative?
Bitcoin has always been the leading indicator. It's been stuck below 70K for weeks now. I think in general, altcoins have been doing badly. There's not a lot of retail interest. In general, vibes are just not that great. I think as we've talked about, a lot of this is just around hype with AI. But what I think is interesting about Evgeny's take on this, and we'll get into this obviously in the interview, is he is the head of one of the most preeminent trading firms in crypto. They really supply the infrastructure for how a lot of trading is possible across the crypto industry. And for him to basically come out and say, look, we've abandoned the ideals of what made crypto, I think is pretty notable. So I'm excited to chat with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's find out what he has to say, and we can break it down on the other side.
Evgeny, thanks so much for joining us here today. Very excited to chat with you.
Thanks for having me.
The reason that I wanted to invite you on is you had a thread on Twitter at the beginning of February that I think might have taken some people by surprise in the world of crypto. Of course, your handle on Twitter is Wishful Cynic. And I think it was a little more cynical than maybe people would have imagined from one of the top figures in crypto. But maybe you can just talk about where your thoughts are at regarding general sentiment with where crypto is right now.
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting because like what shifted, I think, this cycle is, and I think it's related to a lot of like AI slope that we've seen from some of the popular crypto protocols in space. Like a lot of conversations shifted into general chats, like on Telegram especially and beyond. And the vibe that I got from those chats over the last few months has been pretty sad. Like people are discussing AI, people are discussing stocks, people are discussing commodities. People don't discuss great blockchain technology in any shape or form. Like it's just out of conversation. And people are, I think on one hand, very tired of price action. There was this great promise last year when the election happened. And like people thought, okay, now we have everything, but now basically, we got the pro-crypto president, we got very friendly regulators on the US side, like everything works and institutions are coming and like buying stuff and playing with stuff, but it's not reflected in price action on one hand. And on the other hand, it also feels like there isn't really nothing to look forward to at all. So like there is no more experimentation that we see. And that thread was kind of me trying to reflect on like, yeah, what the vibes are, I guess.
And we're going to unpack this, but I think it gets to this core debate that I always think about while covering crypto, which is this sort of inherent tension you see with the industry between this idea of number go up, where really what most people care about in crypto is what the price of Bitcoin is or what the price of name your coin is, versus the actual technology or the principles of the technology and the movement that started with Bitcoin, this idea of having a decentralized currency or decentralized financial system in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, where banks and governments were in charge of it. It's always hard to tell which side is coming out above. And right now, I think what was striking about your thread is obviously you're one of the leading technologists in crypto with your firm Wintermute, which is provides a lot of the infrastructure for trading. But I think it was a bit surprising to see you come out so cynically with where we're at now, maybe driven by the fact that, Bitcoin prices are as low as we've seen them in a year. There isn't that much exciting technology coming out besides some more niche financial applications. I don't know if you would call stablecoins niche, but I mean, where do you think we are in that tension between number go up versus this principles idea of the cypherpunk origination of crypto?
Yeah, so to me, this disconnect started already a year ago, pretty much. Like basically when Trump is discussing, strategic Bitcoin reserve, when we see basically everyone cheering on institutions buying Bitcoin, and when they're cheering on, this treasury companies, for example, buying Bitcoin, it definitely goes against core principle of why Bitcoin was started in the first place, right? It's like it was supposed to be sovereign money going against the government. And instead we are like cheering up on basically the same world order that we were supposed to be against to basically buy our backs. So like that's big inherent contradiction. Like I felt it for a few years already, because like it's important to mention there is a Wintermute side of it and there is my personal side of it. So Wintermute side of it is we have shareholders, like I'm a shareholder, I'm not the only shareholder. And as a business, we need to be prepared for multiple futures. So like there is one future where basically TradFi crypto merges, and basically, we have some of those niche or not so niche technologies making it into TradFi. Like, so maybe stablecoins will replace bank payments. Maybe, Hyperliquid becomes like the way we transact like financial derivatives, for example. It's all possible, but like the way it's currently heading into, like there is nothing cypherpunk about it. It's just basically heading into this like merger. And they're building like on Wintermute level, they're building towards it. We are integrating TradFi exchanges, we're integrating everything fun and interesting and trading that happens in DeFi. They're kind of like ready for that scenario. Like there is another scenario where crypto completely dies and everything just like goes back to train on CME. They're building towards that as well. It would be like sad, but like much more uphill battle for us as a company, because like we would need to integrate a lot more than we currently do. But we are preparing for that as well. And then there is this future where everything starts trading on DeFi and like everyone forgets about AML KYC policies and everything just becomes like free. They're preparing for it as well. I think we will be one of the best prepared companies in the world for that particular future. But I think it's also very unrealistic, like given that most of the bigger governments don't want to give up on KYC AML requirements, though most governments don't want to give up on regulating those basically financial products. So it's encrypted and like anything else. So it's quite unrealistic, unfortunately. And then there is like this scenario where basically TradFi and crypto sort of like coexist together, like basically in some of those, cyberpunk novels, like parallel economy almost. So to me, that's like the most realistic positive scenario, for which we are also ready on the Wintermute side. But it's like, for me personally, that would be the most interesting scenario where this like whole blockchain innovation was not for nothing. It basically gives us freedom to exist into this parallel system, which cannot be touched by governments, cannot be touched by corporates. And then this cannot be touched part is basically established by technology. It's basically technology blocking anyone from affecting it. It's basically like purely decentralized, permissionless, and nobody can affect it. My issue with like current state of crypto is like everyone kind of like abandons this like last pass. Everyone is cheering for this merger of TradFi and DeFi to happen, but like nobody understands that it will barely just cancel out the cypherpunk dream altogether.
So I want to come back to this idea. I mean, how you balance being both the CEO of one of the more prominent crypto firms with this pessimism that you hold for the future of the industry. But I do want to unpack a few of the points that you made in that thread. I mean, the first one is you said the debate between different blockchains like Ethereum and Solana is almost not material because nothing's really happening on those chains. I mean, can you just explain a bit what that means?
I don't think any of those chains won by default because, okay, you still have, I think, most TVL on Ethereum, like in terms of just like dollars being there. Like a lot of it is just like stock money that are not moving anywhere. A lot of this is just experiments by corporates to just like have those. And people are quite overestimate those like pilots basically by corporates to put some bonds on blockchain or put some, I don't know, cash markets on blockchain. And yes, like it happens on Ethereum or on like some L2s, but it's still like it's tiny fraction of economic activity that happens in TradFi. And like what we see on Solana is actually technology definitely works. Like I do remember years when Solana would just like turn off and would need to be like turned on again. Like that doesn't happen. And I think there's like, if there is one single good thing out of this like meme coin money on Solana is it's basically like showing that the blockchain actually works and it can process a massive amount of transactions. But what's also true is that there is nothing like really meaningful happening there. Like, okay, people are trading meme coins still. People are like, there is a like really big trading of like Solana against USDC, but that's pretty much it. Like there is nothing else going on. So it became like a market for Solana and meme coins. Great, but like there is nothing. There are no new dApps. There are no new like, I don't know, big exchanges happening there. It's kind of like stuck and waiting for like this new thing to happen. Because of that, like I really don't feel like anyone won yet. Like I really think it's totally feasible that there can be like new blockchain with new cohort of, I don't know, believers behind it popping up next year, for example, and taking the world by storm. Like it's totally possible because nobody has this like moat yet. Maybe Ethereum had it like a few years ago, but now it's like you can deploy on Ethereum, you can deploy in Solana, but if you have like a killer app or killer dApp or wherever, like it can happen anywhere, I think, at this stage.
You also essentially described stablecoins as a niche win, which again, I think it's probably the use case or the technology that people in crypto celebrate the most as finally being a way for crypto to sort of break out of this blockchain echo chamber. But would you disagree with that?
Well, I have two philosophical problems with that. Like first, it's basically, well, stablecoins is inherently a centralized thing, right? So, okay, we're basically replacing banking rails with stablecoin issue rails. That's very good and efficient. Like it's basically potentially a better product for end user. Like I absolutely hate transferring money using banks. Like every time I need to transfer some like significant amount of money, I need to like send an email or call my bank or send an email and call my bank. And it's just massive pain, and then it arrives like the next day. It's just really inconvenient. While the stablecoins are obviously much better. But at the end of the day, it's just, okay, it makes my life easier. So it's like, it's better for consumers, but it doesn't change the status quo in any way. Like it's still a centralized system. You still have those centralized entities behind it, like Circle or Tether or any other like big centralized stablecoin issue. They can freeze your accounts. They can like blacklist your accounts. They can like basically restrict you from doing something. And like nothing stops the system from being as restrictive as a banking system in future if like more rules and regulations are put into place around this. Currently it's like pretty rare for account to be blacklisted. Like you need to be really like related to something really legal. But there is nothing really stopping like courts in US from like being more prescriptive on like what to freeze going forward if there is a precedent. And so that's like one philosophical issue, that we are not really achieving anything like cypherpunky about this. It's just replacing one set of intermediaries with another one, albeit more efficient. And the second philosophical issue is like we actually keeping imposing the dollar regime on the rest of the world in the even bigger state, which is also like not very cypherpunky. Like we were supposed to like build something parallel to dollar, but now we're actually imposing dollar on the rest of the world even like bigger way. A lot of US-based people are cheering for this. I have a very libertarian upbringing in general. Like I went to like the most libertarian university in Russia. So like I'm still very libertarian. Like I think it's like the best, I don't know, personal freedom philosophy and everything generally. Like I'm much more libertarian than I'm anything else. But I think cheering up for dollar to take over the world and cheering up for this like empire building is, yeah, again, like not very cypherpunky of us. And I really don't understand like my counterparts and like crypto industry who see it as an additional beneficial thing. I think it's definitely not beneficial for us. Like if we actually, continue pursuing the same ideals as we were like 5-10 years ago.
So as you said, you have this tension you have to deal with where obviously you have your philosophical ideals of what the crypto industry should be, but you're also the head of one of the biggest and most important companies in crypto with shareholders with a need to be generating profits. I mean, how do you hold those two contradictions together if you're so pessimistic about where the industry is and where it's headed with having to lead this business? Do you basically just think, oh, well, as long as we're making money off of this reality, that's fine?
So the way I approach it is we are not trying to bet on one single thing to succeed. Like I mentioned before, we are building for multiple futures, for multiple possible futures. Like we just have to do it. But we're also not trying to influence those futures too much. Like we are not putting all our effort into one particular blockchain. We are not backing one particular centralized exchange or one particular DEX. Like we actually working with everyone. And that basically how I guess resolves this contradiction inside of me, because we are trying to make as decentralized, as diverse world as possible with ideas that Wintermute will be hopefully the one thing that glues it all together. Like all those like centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges and different blockchains, whether they are corporate blockchains or not. I don't believe there is like a purely blockchain world possible. Like we'll always have this like mid space, right? So we will arrive at the point where there will be blockchains and like TradFi coexisting together. And my goal is for Wintermute to have to move like bits and hopefully like physical stuff as well throughout those systems, basically. And then that's how I kind of make peace with myself, like trying to build the most decentralized world possible, because decentralized doesn't mean that everything runs on blockchain. Decentralized means also that we have, multiple countries, multiple corporations, multiple like producers of different things. And that's what we are kind of like trying to work towards too.
You did end the thread on a somewhat optimistic note, saying that if I interpret it correctly, you do think there can be some recovery from this. But I guess where I'm confused is that would seem to mean everything that's contributed to Bitcoin's recent success being washed out, be it the Trumps or a lot of these TradFi institutions, banks coming into it, to be able to recapture those cypherpunk ideals. If that were to happen, it seems like you'd see another inevitable crash, which I imagine would be overall bad for your business.
I wouldn't say like I think there will be another crash. Like I said, it's possible that we'll see more correction, but I think this, if anything, like my expectation with the correction would come more on the back of basically TradFi markets crashing, potentially because like AI is like overblown currently. Why I'm generally like philosophically optimistic, apart from like me being visual cynic, so I have to be visual as well, not just cynical. It's basically like where the pendulum swings currently. It's just like, I also said like this cyberpunk against cypherpunk, but like if you go towards like this proper cyberpunk world, this is a world where like everything is centralized, everything is ruled by corporations and maybe governments, but like more corporations. I think we will see more and more demand. Like we had it like a few years ago, like we had it with like trucker protests and basically all those like crazy laws that the European Union is imposing. Like people started to feel that, yes, there is this benefit of having decentralized systems that parallel to existing systems. I do feel that like the more governments are trying to squeeze everywhere globally, the more people will realize, okay, we actually need these parallel systems, because otherwise, like there is not like, there has to be an alternative for us to exist, basically. There has to be an alternative for us to transact and exchange value and basically, almost like create this like parallel states or tribes. So basically my bet is like this pendulum will swing back again, where people realize there is a benefit to this crazy blockchain stuff, and it's not just like meme coins. That's what makes me generally optimistic, because like I do believe in this swings from one side to another. Like basically, world never stays in one extreme for too long.
Well, I guess that's a somewhat hopeful note to end it on. Evgeny, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Interesting interview there, Leo. What struck you most about what Evgeny had to say?
So listen, I think I've always been more cynical than you have about crypto, not necessarily about the principles of the movement. And I think that's what's really interesting about what he said, which is essentially there's always been this tension in crypto between number go up, or this idea that people only really care about the speculative side of it, versus the cypherpunk movement that created it, this idea of having a decentralized currency and financial system in opposition to Wall Street and government control. And Evgeny very much comes from this cypherpunk side of the argument and says number go up has completely subsumed where crypto is. We've lost sight of those principles, and we're essentially in a pretty bad spot right now. And I think for someone with such a financial stake in crypto to come out and say that is fairly stark.
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder when people take positions like this, whether there might be sort of some other, ulterior motive, or there's something in the game, or, it's rare to kind of get an executive with a lot of money at stake sort of speaking hard truths like this, unless they have some other agenda. But in terms of the point of, I do miss the early days of Bitcoin. There really was. And, you go meet old time Bitcoiners, they still are really committed to decentralization. And there really is a sort of ideological belief to the whole thing. But, that has been largely subsumed. But you could say the same thing about the internet, to be fair. I mean, I remember in the early days of the web. I'm old enough to remember that. It was like, the internet treats censorship as a form of bug and roots around it. There really was a lot of idealism and, early listserv and early internet. And then we got like the enshittification of the internet, as someone put it. And I think that's just sort of maybe the arc of technology generally. But then things, branch and swing. You don't know what's going to happen next. So, yeah, it certainly was a pessimistic take. But I'm also, not really one for pearl clutching and things like that. I'm sure, crypto is just 100 times the size. And so I think that in itself is a triumph. And yeah, if it's sort of lost its soul a bit, I mean, it can go buy a new one, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I would argue it's depressing with the internet. You had this idea in the early days that it could be this more democratized platform where anybody could share ideas. And instead, what we have is a few companies essentially controlling the entire internet. I think a similar thing is happening with crypto. And I mean, even more surprising, I think what he talked about is basically giving rise to this idea that a lot of people have been seeing, which is that this argument about which blockchain is going to win out is sort of moot because there's nothing really happening on any of them, including Solana and Ethereum of note. And potentially even more importantly, what he said about stablecoins, which have certainly been the breakout use case in crypto over the past couple of years, is in his mind, in this libertarian argument, stablecoins really are antithetical to the cypherpunk ideas of crypto, which is basically not allowing, one type of currency to control the world, in this case, the dollar, and not really having it be done in concert with governments that have censorship capabilities. So it was refreshing to have a real cypherpunk mentality to what's happening in crypto now. But as you said, certainly he has his own motivation. In this case, Wintermute can build for whatever future happens. So maybe he has less of a dog in the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the, periodic reminder, what are we even doing here? Because crypto was supposed to be more than that. And sitting here, begging to cooperate with the government for bigger stablecoin, regulation is certainly not what Satoshi in his white paper was all about. So I do think it's good. There's people like Evgeny on the scene to keep, everyone else honest. But, crypto always changes. This time next year, we'll see where we're at. Who knows? Maybe we'll be back to a cypherpunk existence. But anyways, I think that's all I got today. Leo, anything else from you?
That's it from my end.
Okay, this has been the Fortune Crypto Playbook. I'm Jeff John Roberts.
And I'm Leo Schwartz. See you next time.